Oda has just revealed the Sun God. No, not Luffy, a completely new mysterious giant character that has trapped the Straw Hats inside a giant role-playing diorama, quite literally playing gods. And let me tell you, I'm just dying to know who this new false god could be. I mean, everything about them is absolutely crazy. And with so much mystery, from them being set up as the first real important character of the new arc, to their disturbing skull mask design, and then the general craziness of what in the world is actually going on with these kidnapped people. Like, I need to understand, are we even in Elbaf right now, or instead still inside an illusion? And is this new Sun God character really a giant, or has Oda actually once again fooled us with a completely broken new devil fruit power that has actually shrunk the Straw Hats and all the people? Because when I looked into it, it turns out that this chapter has actually a bunch of evidence for exactly that. So let's start with this false Sun Gods, because clearly they are the first real important new character that we're meeting in Elbaf, and that fact by itself gives us some major clues to their new role in the story. And that's because, as you probably know, in almost every new major arc, Oda will jumpstart the narrative by introducing us to a local character who the Straw Hats eventually befriend, and then that sympathetic character will introduce us to the main conflict in the story. For example, just like Tama, for instance, from Wano, who Luffy met right at the start and then demonstrated exactly just how horrible Wano had become under the rule of Orochi and Kaido. And so if that is what's going on here, then this false Sun God character might actually be an ally, even though they do seem to have kidnapped the Straw Hats here. And just to run with this idea for a second here, there are a few ways that I could see this person become a positive, friendly character down the road. To start, there's actually some evidence that this character could actually potentially be a child instead of some ferocious giants. Because I want to take a step back and really look at everything that we have seen so far in this insane first part of the arc. Now, obviously, Luffy's group has been kidnapped and trapped inside this mirror box with a bunch of other people and animals. Secondly, we also know that someone must have dressed them up in Viking costumes, and then we see the false Sun God person who is clearly playing a role as the god of this fake kingdom. And so all of that put together just kind of screams to me that this could be a child who is playing with their literal toys in their own little fantasy worlds. I mean, can't you remember when you were a young kid and you created your own little fantasy adventures with your toys and Legos? I mean, that's kind of the vibe I'm getting here, right? Now, just to be completely clear, of course, they don't have to be a child, but I kind of feel like it does fit quite nicely, perhaps that they are the son or the daughter of the giant prince Loki. Now, just because they're a child, or I guess from what we see in this chapter, potentially more a teenager, that doesn't of course forgive that they are playing with captured real people and all, but I could see a backstory like this is the neglected child of Loki, or someone who has to play all on their own and just doesn't know any better themselves, and Luffy and the Straw Hats kind of teach them. You know, it could very easily lead to Luffy or Nami or the entire crew there showing them that they are wrong and then setting everyone free, which could then lead into the main conflict of this arc. Now, the big question here, of course, in this case is how would Luffy even get this person on their side? And surprisingly enough, though, we already have that answer in this chapter as well. You see, clearly this person enjoys being the Sun God, but I will take it one step further and say that they probably worship the Sun God themselves. Remember, we do know at this point from Dorian Broggy that the Sun God is an actual part of the giant people's religion, if not the main character of it, so I could very easily see this false Sun God pretending to be the god that they actually worship. Which means that when they find out that Luffy is the actual true Sun God, they might turn from wanting to capture the Straw Hats to suddenly becoming very, very friendly. At least that's one way I can see it all playing out here. I mean, Luffy did show off his gear 5th form when fighting the giant snake and Raven in this chapter, so there is already a chance that the false Sun God has seen who Luffy truly is. Anyways, to bring this back to Norse mythology, the actual Norse god Loki does have a daughter named Hel who is supposed to rule over the underworld, so there is a lore connection to this idea as well. Which, if this person really is an Elbaf prince or princess, then it kind of answers yet another question of whether or not we are actually actually on Elbaf right now, because Oda is kind of playing with us here. It seemed like we were there and then everything was an illusion, which in this case would be, yes, we are in the Island of Giants already. But this fact isn't quite as confirmed as we first thought, and I will break down the other absolutely crazy possibilities of where else we might be right now in just a few moments. But first, if this sun god isn't going to be our early sympathetic character, then the most other likely scenario is that they are straight up just a villain. Maybe they're something like the jailer here, or someone who watches over people who have been kidnapped. I mean, that could kind of lead to our first real mini conflict here with defeating this person and freeing all the other trapped people inside here. Or who knows, maybe this could actually be Loki themselves, who just has a twisted hobby of collecting and playing with people. I mean, we can't really rule that option out either, because don't forget that we still don't have an explanation for some of the really weird magic that has been going on with, for example, the cat transforming into a lion from the last chapter, which just kind of perfectly fits with the trickster theme of the god Loki. Also, I kind of only realized this after rereading the last chapter, but there have been a lot of art inconsistencies with all of the Straw Hats last chapter, and Oda just doesn't seem sloppy enough to suddenly have one chapter where everything is kind of wrong. So that seems to be one major hint as well somewhere. But with all of that being said though, there is one huge possibility that we haven't discussed yet, and hold on tight here because I think this one is a real banger here. Because there are a few things that have been really bugging me about this whole situation that Luffy and the others are in. Starting off with the very weird disappearance of Luffy, the Sunny, and all the others back in chapter 1126. I mean, it very clearly confused the other giants and the remaining Straw Hats, and we never really learned how the kidnapped crewmates could have sped ahead to Elbaf way before the giant ship could have gotten there themselves. Now, of course, it could have been a devil fruit power that somehow transported them, or some sort of creature, but we have already seen a teleportation devil fruit, so can't just be that simple. But if it's nothing like that, then of course we have to bring up the other very real possibility that Luffy and the crew haven't gone ahead to Elbaf, they are somewhere else. They could be on another ship that snuck in and then ran away, or maybe even on some mysterious secret island with a bunch of kidnapped people, going back all the way to like 2 or 3 chapters ago where we speculated about a mini arc before Elbaf. Which would kind of make sense, except that it would be very weird if no one on the giant ship saw the Sunny get taken to begin with. I mean, sure, the giants were all partying really hard and it seems like most of them ended up passing out, but surely someone on this ship was at least awake to be a lookout or something and pilot the ship. I mean, they are in the new world. Like, what I'm saying here is I just can't believe that everyone was just dead asleep. That would be weird, right? Which now brings me to a very interesting possibility that could explain everything going on with this mysterious disappearance, because what if this isn't a giant, but what if the Sunny and the Straw Hats had actually been shrunken down to a tiny size? No, really, think about it. Shrinking everyone down would make it way easier to pull off the kidnapping here. It would also explain how no one even saw the Sunny vanishing, and it would 100% be like the most Oda thing to do, like introduce a power that allows you to shrink people in the arc that is supposed to be all about giants. Like, if you've read any One Piece at all, you will know that Oda just loves these types of red herrings or tiny little twists in the story. And I'll be honest with you, I cannot get this idea out of my head. I mean, we've already had to deal with the idea that we all thought that the people from the previous chapters were actually giants, but clearly they aren't based on when we see them next to the Straw Hats in this very chapter. Meaning that we already had people who we thought were giants, but they actually weren't, so wouldn't it make a lot of sense for this false sun god character, who we think is a giant as well, like an extra big giant, to not be a giant at all, and instead everyone else was actually shrunken down? Do you see the vision here? Especially because when you look at the character in the hallway, they look very normal. They don't look as bulky as any of the giants actually do. And so if that were true, then it kind of brings up the possibility that the false sun god might not even be a giant, but just a regular sized human who just looks absolutely massive because everyone else is now really tiny. And that idea actually also works pretty well with the toy theme, the Legos, the giant animals, and so on and so forth. You get the idea, right? But the best part of this is that this isn't even the biggest piece of evidence that I have for this idea here, because now we know that there is supposed to be a temple for the sun god inside of the fake kingdom, plus we know that people inside can communicate communicate with the false sun god, so all of that makes me think that this false sun god character can actually show up themselves inside the diorama. But clearly, based on their own size shown in this chapter, that would be absolutely impossible, at least not without destroying everything, so it would make sense, I think, that they can shrink themselves down as well to actually better fit inside the mirror cage as well. And I would argue we might even be seeing that a little bit when they're starting to chase the Straw Hats at the end of this chapter. Then we also have this weird line from Usopp in the chapter that it would take an incredibly diligent and delicate giant to actually dress them in these small clothes with their giant fingers, but of course that wouldn't need to be the case at all if the false sun god could just dress them while they were all the same normal size. And just to throw one more bit of evidence in here, we do know that Elbaf is tied into fables. Elbaf is the word fable in reverse, in case you didn't know that. Plus, we've already had references to Alice in Wonderland with the cat and the rabbit. And how does Alice in Wonderland start out? Remember that? Well, it starts out with Alice shrinking as she enters the rabbit hole down into the Wonderland. Do you see what I'm getting at here? I think we can pretty safely say that this is a very strong theory. I personally like to think that this person isn't actually a giant, but a human with a shrinking devil fruit ability. Or I mean, I guess maybe they could still be a giant who has shrunk themselves as well, or just shrunk the Straw Hats, which is why they look larger than other giants. But honestly, in this case, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to actually be a human who just worships the sun god and wanted to feel what it was like to be a giant themselves. And there are actually also some other hints that the false sun god here isn't the only false god around in this mysterious building, but more on that in just a moment. To summarize, these are basically the two main theories that I have in my head right now, and they could both be true at the same time as well, where this false sun god is supposed to be a sympathetic character that the Straw Hats will save, possibly a neglected child of Loki or something like that, and this person also still has a shrinking devil fruit power and likes to pretend to be gods. What I'm saying is, it could be one, the other, neither, or even both. But at the same time, I think we still can't rule out the idea that I actually threw out in my exclusive early chapter thoughts on Patreon, where I still like the idea a lot of this being some sort of hallucination or even some sort of game-like world, and what we're seeing here isn't even completely real. Think about it. The title of this chapter is RPG, or role-playing game. So I'm definitely not dismissing that possibility at all, considering all of the weird drawing inconsistencies in the last chapter that we talked about. Plus, just how funny would this all be if Nami just wakes up suddenly and this was all just some sort of bad dream and they're really somewhere else entirely. But again, I discussed the details of that idea and much more in my early thoughts of the chapter, which I'll be posting each week on Patreon. So if you want to get access to that for next week's chapter and even more other special perks, you can sign up using the link in the description below, and shout out to all my Patreon members. But I have to say though, going back to this chapter, there are some truly insane hidden clues here that we are actually already in Elbaf. Because I want you to take a look at the door right here, which you probably didn't pay too much attention to at all when you read it, but in reality, this could be a super important clue for what will happen in the next few chapters. Now, it could be a coincidence that this door has boards on it that seem to form the letter Z, but let's be real, it looks really suspicious and there are no coincidences with Oda. And interestingly enough, there are actually a few really relevant ways that we could interpret this symbol. I know we're gonna get a bit weird here, but let's talk about it. The first option is that this is just the regular way this door has been constructed, which means nothing at all, but let's be real, that would be completely boring, so of course we're gonna dive into way more lore than probably necessary here, because in fact, the more interesting option is that this symbol is actually a Nordic rune, which has a ton of secret meaning for this room and also the entire building possibly that Luffy and the others are trapped in here. And boy, you should have seen the rabbit hole of Norse research with mythology and writing that I went down looking at all of these runes. Because actually, if you look into history here a little bit, and with my German roots and all of that, you could kind of start to see... Let's just look at this chart right here, where we see that this rune, this S-shaped rune, could also be a Z-shaped rune, and this could be what is on the door, which just so happens to be the rune representing, yes, the sun. And that just makes perfect sense because the prisoners in the room all refer to this mysterious person as the sun god. So if this is the actual sun rune on this door, you could be asking, what does that mean for the upcoming chapters? Well, it could mean that just like there's a room with a sun god, there could also just as easily be a room marked by different Nordic runes on the door. And since I already did all the research, I'm gonna absolutely throw them into this video. So some interesting ones to point out here could be this one, which actually represents wealth, or this one, which represents death, which actually also kind of looks similar to the Z symbol. So maybe the Straw Hat room is actually the death room and everyone inside was destined to die. Like really, I can't stress enough, I went way too deep on the lore of these runes. Like there is even this one that kind of looks like Dragon's face tattoo, and one that could represent Shanks, who is inspired by the Nordic god Tyr because he got his arm bitten off, and leadership and all that. But what I think this all means is that there are actually probably many other rooms just like this one, possibly also with these little dioramas with more people trapped inside. And so based on what we know about Luffy and his role as someone who frees people, I could very easily imagine that in the next few chapters, we could see Luffy freeing everyone trapped inside all of these mysterious rooms. At least that's my theory that I'm going with for now. And luckily enough, it also ties in quite nicely into the idea of the 9 realms that we discussed in the last chapter review, because many of the Nordic runes fit pretty nicely with the themes of the 9 realms as well, such as the Sun rune for Asgard, the Death rune for Hell, or even the rune for Ice to go with Jotunheim or Niflheim. And also, since I'm already way out there with this all, what's funny is that the rune for the Sun actually also looks like the scar on Harry Potter's head, which just happens to be a quite hilarious tie-in with the color page for this week's chapter, with the Straw Hats wearing the Hogwarts wizard robes. I mean, I just love it when Oda ties all of these things together. I just want this to be true so bad. Now, we're not quite done with the Nordic lore here though, because just like we have the sun god, there is actually also a Nordic moon god who is the sibling of the sun god. And if Oda does stick with these parallels, we could even be seeing another false god, this time the moon god, make an appearance in the story very soon, and then kind of potentially confirm that someone like Blackbeard or someone like Emu could actually be the real moon god that parallels Luffy. Also, speaking of false god, I just can't go any further at this point without once again pointing out all the crazy parallels that we've seen so far between this arc and Skypiea, because this chapter gave us even more hints about the similarities, with there being a false sun god here and of course Enel being a false god up in the sky. What's even crazier though is that Enel wanted to go to the moon, and we just discussed that we might also see a moon god in the story here very soon as well. We also have the parallel of a giant snake with the creature that Luffy fought in this chapter compared to Nola from Skypiea. Where did that giant snake come from? Then of course we also had giant plants in Skypiea with the giant jack and the Yggdrasil tree right here in this arc, though who knows if that one is actually real. So perhaps we will also see Yggdrasil, or more possibly the Atom tree, come crashing down just like the giant jack did in Skypiea. And of course we can't forget that Skypiea was also the very first hint that we got of Nika, with Luffy dancing around the bonfire and the mentioning of the 4 different gods there. Okay, but bringing all of this back to this chapter, we also finally found Chopper. And while you may have just thought that this was not as important, the fact that Chopper, out of all people, was separated from the other 5 actually connected some super interesting clues about deers and the giants in Norse mythology as well. Because check this out. When we first see the false sun god walking down the hallway, we see them wearing this deer skull on top of their head, like with this weird fluffy hanging thing below. And first you might think like, oh, that's interesting because Chopper is also a deer, well, reindeer, but kind of. But wait until you see this. Have you ever noticed that each of the giant ships, the giant warrior pirates and the new giant warrior pirates that we have both seen in the story, also have something like a deer skull masthead? In fact, the new giant warrior pirates have the exact same thing in the front of their ship. I mean, just look at the 2 figureheads of these 2 ships. Notice that both of these have the exact same skull with horns and even the fluffy thing as well, which could actually hint at this person being an insider, but I mean, we'll talk about that later. And while it isn't exactly the same as Chopper's antlers, yes, the fact that both of these ships have deer-like mastheads means that they consider these animals pretty special in some way. And so put that together with the false sun god's deer skull, and I'm starting to think that they had some sort of special plan for Chopper exclusively. Now, what those plans are, far, we aren't too sure yet, but my guess is that they either wanted to kill Chopper for his horns, or on the other hand, maybe they were going to treat him like a special guest. Either way, having Chopper back means that the weakling trio is finally reunited too, but what's really interesting from this chapter is that Usopp pretty much got told straight up by his captain that he can do much better. In fact, Luffy just straight up told the sniper that he should have absolutely been able to defeat the cat-lion creature all by himself, which I guess you could look at it as an insult or as Luffy showing his belief in Usopp, but either way, it kind of highlights the fact that Usopp's strength is going to be a major focus for his character once again in this arc, similar to how it was back during Water 7. Only that this time, I think we're all hoping for some truly major character development and power upgrades from Usopp, since this is the arc that we expect him to fully accept himself as a brave warrior of the sea. And they will all certainly need that, because there could be some truly disastrous consequences for any crewmates that can't hold their own in a fight during the final saga, because it is clear that there are a ton of massive threats coming for the Straw Hats in the final arcs here, such as the Gorosei, God's Knights, the Marines, and even the Blackbeard Pirates. And so if the weakling trio here can't step up and win when it counts, then it might actually be time once again to consider which new powerhouses could actually still join the crew going forward. And if you want to see exactly who I think could still join the crew, you can watch that video right here. Thanks so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.